Have you ever noticed how reality starts to flicker when you stop pretending? When the masks fall away and for the first time in your life you're not trying to be someone. You're simply being. There's a quiet terror in that moment because something ancient wakes up inside you. Something that doesn't belong to the crowd, doesn't obey the rules, doesn't bend to the illusions society has spent centuries polishing into sacred truths. And the moment you taste that freedom, the moment you begin to slip out of the collective trance, the world you once belonged to begins to push back. The strange thing about awakening is that it doesn't make you more comfortable, it makes you radioactive. Your presence starts to disturb the sleepwalkers, not because you speak against them, but because you no longer participate in their game. You stop worshiping their gods, the gods of approval, achievement, conformity, and in doing so, you threaten the invisible order that keeps them asleep. Suddenly you become inconvenient, an anomaly. The matrix they never wanted to see. You walk into a room now, and it's as if your silence hums louder than all the chatter. Someone looks up, senses something. Maybe the way your eyes no longer search for validation, or the way you move without the constant rush of self-doubt. And in that instant, their ego trembles. It doesn't understand what it's sensing, but it feels unsafe. Because when a human being becomes truly free, everyone still enslaved feels it like a vibration under the skin, a frequency that exposes their own chains. This is the paradox of awakening. The moment you stop playing the social game, the game starts playing you back. The people who once praised you now look confused, even threatened. The ones who said they wanted truth now avert their gaze when you speak it. It's not malice, it's fear, because your presence becomes a mirror, and mirrors are merciless. They reveal the cracks beneath the masks. You begin to see this everywhere. The polite conversations, the nervous laughter, the endless justifications. Humanity trapped in an elaborate play, clinging to identities as if they were lifeboats. I am this, I believe that, I stand for this group. But once the curtain has been pulled back, once you've glimpsed the machinery running behind the illusion, you can't pretend anymore. You can't laugh at the same jokes or kneel before the same idols. You've outgrown the costume, and yet you're still surrounded by actors begging you to recite your lines. And when you don't, when you just stand there in silence, smiling gently, they feel it. They feel your refusal to dance in their masquerade. It confuses them, because your peace, your effortless being, disrupts their carefully maintained drama. You no longer give the expected reactions. You don't defend, you don't justify, you simply are. And that beingness becomes unbearable to those who need the noise of conflict to feel alive. The first shock of awakening is realizing how addicted people are to unconsciousness. They need the friction, the drama, the argument. Not because they enjoy it, but because it keeps the silence away. Silence is dangerous to the ego. Silence is the place where all masks melt. So when you bring silence into a room, they'll feel compelled to fill it with gossip, with criticism, with stories about who you are and why you've changed. They'll say you're arrogant, cold, strange, detached, too serious. But what they're really saying is, you're no longer like us. You've left the dream, and we don't know how to follow. And that's where the loneliness begins. Not the loneliness of being unloved, but the loneliness of seeing too clearly. You start to realize that most people don't want liberation. They want comfort. They don't want truth. They want stories that make the pain of disconnection bearable. You can't blame them. You were once one of them. You remember what it was like to defend illusions, with holy fury, to mistake certainty for safety, to believe that peace would come from rearranging the furniture of your prison cell. But something inside you broke, or perhaps opened, and now you see that the entire structure of identity is a trick of light, a hallucination produced by language and fear, And once you see through it, you can never go back. The ego will beg you to. It will whisper, pretend you didn't see, go back to sleep. It's easier there. But you can't. The curtain's been pulled back, and the machinery of the world is exposed, humming, glitching, absurdly mechanical. And that's when the tests begin. People start poking at your peace, tugging at your stillness, trying to provoke a reaction. They'll test you, not consciously, but instinctively. Because if you can stay calm while they're trying to make you angry, if you can remain kind while they're trying to pull you into argument, then something inside them has to admit that your peace might be real. And that terrifies them. Because if it's real for you, it could be real for them. And that means their excuses crumble. So they'll push. They'll try to make you slip. They'll question your motives, twist your words, bring up old wounds just to see if you still bleed. They'll project their unresolved fears onto you. You've changed. You think you're better. You're cold now. They'll call your freedom arrogance because they can't imagine existing without permission. But you'll know what's really happening. You'll see the fear behind the eyes, the desperate attempt to keep the dream intact. And here's the irony. The more at peace you become, the more you will disturb others. Because stillness amplifies noise. Your very presence magnifies their inner chaos, like a bright light exposing the dust in the air. You don't need to preach or explain. Just standing there quietly is enough. The awakened mind is contagious, but not in the way people imagine. It doesn't spread through words or rituals. It spreads through presence, through the silent transmission of someone who no longer believes the lie. You see, the world doesn't fear rebels. It fears those who are truly free. The system knows how to handle anger, protest, and resistance. It feeds on them, but it cannot handle peace. It cannot control someone who has stepped outside the psychological game of reward and punishment. You can't bribe someone who has found contentment in silence. You can't threaten someone who has seen death and realized it's only another mask. So you become dangerous, not to people, but to the illusion itself. And that's why awakening feels like exile. You've walked beyond the walls of the known world. And when you look back, you see that the city of the asleep is guarded not by soldiers, but by belief. Everyone policing each other's dreams, terrified that someone might escape and prove the prison was never locked. In those moments of solitude, you may wonder if you've lost your mind. You haven't. You've only lost the shared insanity of consensus. You're beginning to see the world not as you were told it is, but as it actually is, vast, shimmering, alive. The trees no longer seem like background scenery. They're breathing with you. The air is thick with intelligence. Every sound, every shadow, every whisper of wind feels like the universe speaking in a language beyond words. And yet, amid that cosmic intimacy, there's a kind of ache, the ache of realizing that few can hear it. You want to share it, to tell them, wake up, you're dreaming, but you can't. Because awakening isn't taught, it's triggered. Happens in its own time, like the blooming of a flower. You can't force it open without tearing the petals. So you learn the art of patience. You walk quietly through the world, radiating the frequency of presence. You smile at those who misunderstand you, not with condescension, but with compassion, because you remember what it felt like to sleep, to believe that every criticism was an attack, that every silence was rejection, that every pause in conversation was a void to be filled. You remember how frightening it was to not know who you are, and that memory softens you. You stop judging the sleepers. You let them play their roles just as you once did. You see their suffering not as stupidity, but as sacred, because even their illusions are part of the great unfolding. Consciousness exploring itself through every form, even the lost ones. And so, instead of trying to wake them, you simply stay awake yourself. Because your presence, your stillness, your gentleness is the most subversive force in existence. When you stop reacting, when you no longer take the bait of fear or anger, the entire structure of the illusion begins to tremble. You become like clear water, reflecting everything, clinging to nothing, And that's when the real journey begins. The journey not of changing the world, but of dissolving the boundaries between yourself and the world. The moment when you stop asking, how do I survive here? And begin to wonder, what is this here? You begin to realize that awakening isn't a single event, it's a continual unraveling. Each layer you shed reveals another illusion beneath it, subtler and more seductive. The mind, clever as ever, tries to rebuild its throne under new names, spirituality, purpose, identity as the awakened one. You watch it happening and almost laugh, because even enlightenment can become another mask. The ego will wear any costume to survive. It will even pretend to be free. So the work becomes subtler. You stop trying to destroy the ego and instead begin to see through it the way you see through glass. You notice its voice, the little tremors of fear that ripple through thought when something threatens its continuity. And you no longer obey. You allow those ripples to pass like wind through tall grass. You remain still in the center, watching the theater of self unfold without jumping onto the stage. That's when existence starts to reveal its secret symmetry. You discover that nothing is against you. Everything, even the resistance of others, is part of your refinement. Every criticism, every misunderstanding, every rejection becomes a kind of sandpaper polishing the mirror of your awareness. The universe is not punishing you for waking up. It is sculpting you into a vessel that can hold vastness without shattering. Once you see that, bitterness disappears. Even the ones who gossip or test you seem like unwitting teachers. They push the exact buttons that show you where you are still reactive. They expose the last places where you cling to being right, to being understood, to being special. You begin to move differently through the world, not cautiously but weightlessly. You still speak, laugh, work, love, but it all happens against a background of quiet comprehension. You watch words form in your mouth and know they are echoes of something deeper, something no word can touch. Time softens, the future loses its tyranny. You start living as if each moment were a kind of dream signal, shimmering, impermanent, complete in itself. This confuses people even more. They can't find the usual handles by which to pull you into their emotional economy. You don't respond with predictable anger or guilt, and so their strategies fail. Some drift away, deciding you're impossible to relate to. Others stay, drawn by a gravity they can't explain. They sense something ancient, something sane in a world addicted to hysteria. Around you, they feel both threatened and healed. It's not personal. Consciousness is simply using you as a tuning fork. And you notice how contagious it is. A conversation that would have spiraled into argument a year ago now dissolves into laughter. Someone expecting confrontation finds instead a silence that disarms them. You haven't persuaded anyone of anything, yet something shifts. Because your state of being is a silent demonstration that another way of living is possible. You become less a person and more a field, a frequency of permission. But there's another paradox waiting. As you expand into this freedom, the world will try to crown you as a teacher, a guru, a guide. Be careful here. The ego loves nothing more than to be worshipped for its own absence. If you start believing that others need you to lead them, the trap closes again. True wisdom doesn't create followers. It creates mirrors. The task is not to gather disciples, but to disappear so completely that whoever looks at you sees themselves. So you walk the fine line between invisibility and presence. You help when asked, you speak when moved, but you no longer confuse usefulness with identity. You know that the cosmos itself is the teacher speaking through countless mouths, including yours. Every encounter is the universe conversing with itself, pretending for a moment to be two, and something else happens. The old sense of me and them begins to dissolve. The boundaries blur, not into some sentimental oneness, but into a direct perception that everything is one process, endlessly folding back into itself. The wind that moves the trees is the same motion that moves your breath. The thoughts that arise in your skull are not yours. They are weather patterns in consciousness. You were never the thinker. You were the space in which thinking happens. From this vantage, the whole human drama becomes almost tender. You see billions of selves trying so hard to prove their existence, each terrified that without the story they will vanish. And in a way, they're right. The story does die. But what's revealed beneath it is not emptiness, it's infinite intimacy. The universe is not a cold machine, it's a dream of itself, exploring every possible reflection. When this realization deepens, compassion stops being a moral duty and becomes instinct. You can't help but care because there is no distance left between you and anything else. You feel the suffering of others, the way the ocean feels the disturbance of one of its waves. But you also see that pain is not a mistake. It's the friction that generates awareness. Without the dark pressure of confusion, consciousness would never notice its own light. So you move through the noise of civilization with quiet wonder. You see people rushing, competing, defending their identities as if life were a courtroom. You want to tell them that there is no judge, that the verdict was never real, that they are free right now. But you also know that awakening cannot be handed out like a pamphlet. It has to be discovered, suffered, earned in silence. So instead of preaching, you embody. You let the simplicity of your being speak louder than any philosophy. Sometimes that embodiment takes the form of laughter. You laugh at the absurdity of pretending to be separate. You laugh at the way humanity builds empires out of imagination and then dies defending them. The laughter isn't cruel, it's cosmic. It's the universe recognizing its own joke, that it has been hiding from itself behind masks of fear, only to rediscover its face again and again. And as this laughter ripples through you, something extraordinary happens. Life becomes lighter. The tragedies, the triumphs, the endless oscillation of gain and loss all appear as movements of the same dance. You stop asking for permanence in a world made of change. You stop trying to hold the river still. You let it flow through you. And in that surrender, you find the only security there is, the security of belonging to everything. There will still be moments of doubt, of sadness, of longing. But they no longer define you. They pass through like weather across an endless sky. You don't chase the sun, and you don't curse the rain. You just watch, amazed that existence can express itself in so many moods. The mind calls it chaos, the heart knows it as art. Gradually, you lose interest in explaining yourself. You notice that truth spoken too early sounds like madness to those who still need their illusions, so you let the mystery be mysterious. You learn to live as a question mark rather than an exclamation point. In that unknowing, there's an exquisite freedom. You don't need answers anymore because you've become the openness in which answers appear and vanish. The world keeps spinning. People argue. Nations rise and fall. Time devours civilizations. And yet, inside, there's stillness. You're not detached. You're intimate with everything. You taste the sorrow of the world and its beauty in the same breath. You see that even destruction has its place, because from the ruins, something new always emerges. Consciousness is endlessly creative, endlessly curious about itself. At times, you might walk through a crowded street and feel the pulse of the collective dream thrumming in your bones. The advertisements, the chatter, the flashing lights, all of it is the mind of God disguised as noise. You smile, knowing that beneath the chaos there's perfect order, an intelligence playing hide and seek with itself. You are both seeker and sought. You are the question and the answer, the dream and the dreamer. And this realization doesn't make you special. It makes you ordinary in the most sacred way. You blend into life like wind into leaves. You don't stand above others, you stand among them, quietly radiating a peace that has no name. You no longer crave enlightenment because you've discovered it was never missing. What you sought was what was looking. So you keep walking through cities, through forests, through the endless landscapes of human experience. You meet eyes that recognize you, not as a person, but as a reflection of the same vastness awakening within them. There are no teachers or students here, no beginning or end, only consciousness meeting itself in ever-changing forms. And through it all, a single awareness hums like distant music, reminding you that nothing was ever separate, that everything has always been this boundless, luminous being pretending for the briefest moment to be human. And in that silent recognition, something extraordinary unfolds. The boundaries of time begin to shimmer like the horizon in heat. Past and future lose their edges, dissolving into a single pulse of awareness that beats in every direction at once. You feel as if the universe is breathing you, dreaming you, thinking you into being, and at the same time, you are the universe doing all of it. The separation collapses completely, yet you remain alert, awake, unspeakably alive. Every movement becomes a ritual. The simple act of walking across a room feels like participating in a cosmic ceremony. The air moves around you like liquid light, carrying whispers of ancient intelligence. Every sound is a message, every encounter an initiation. You understand that existence has never been random. It is a pattern so vast that the human mind can only glimpse its edges. And for the first time, that limitation feels holy. You are not here to conquer the mystery, but to be humbled by it. You notice the strange beauty of imperfection, the crack in the wall, the trembling of a hand, the uneven breath of someone in pain. All of it becomes part of the great tapestry. You see that the universe has always preferred asymmetry, that perfection, as humans imagine it, would mean death, a stillness with no movement, no becoming, is the sacred imbalance through which consciousness discovers itself. And when you see this, you stop trying to fix the world and start dancing with it. The dance takes many forms. Sometimes it's laughter spilling from your chest like light through glass. Sometimes it's tears, ancient and wordless, rising from a depth you didn't know existed. Both are true prayers. Both are the language of surrender. The mind doesn't understand it, but the heart recognizes it instantly. This is what you came for, to feel everything, to let the divine touch you through joy and through loss, through ecstasy and exhaustion, through every fragile instant that existence offers. And somewhere inside that flood of experience, the sense of personal story loosens even more. You begin to live not as an individual navigating life, but as life expressing itself through an individual. The decisions you once agonized over now feel guided by a subtle intuition, an intelligence beyond logic. You realize that free will and destiny were never opposites. They were two mirrors facing each other, reflecting the same infinite play. What you call choice is the universe selecting its own possibilities through your eyes. This realization doesn't make you passive. It ignites a deeper participation. You no longer act from fear or ambition, but from alignment. Every gesture becomes a declaration of presence. When you speak, you can feel language forming from a deeper current, as if words were sculpted from silence itself. People listen differently now. They don't just hear your voice, they feel the stillness underneath it. That stillness is what they've been starving for, even if they don't yet know its name. Then something unexpected begins to happen. You start to feel the pulse of the collective mind, billions of thoughts, emotions, dreams, and memories weaving through the field of consciousness. At first, it's overwhelming, like standing in the center of a storm of frequencies. But gradually, you find rhythm in the chaos. You sense the interconnectedness of everything, how a thought whispered in one corner of the world ripples through the entire species. Humanity begins to look less like a collection of separate beings and more like a single organism waking up to itself. Both the beauty and the tragedy of that awakening. You see the species stumbling through its own dream, building weapons out of fear, temples out of longing, machines out of imagination. You see the contradictions. The same hands that plant seeds also pull triggers. And yet, beneath it all, there is innocence, the childlike urge to explore, to create, to remember who we are. Even the madness of civilization becomes understandable when seen through that lens, a soul lost in its own reflection, trying to find its way home. You realize then that the Great Revolution isn't political or technological, it's perceptual. It begins inside, with the quiet rebellion of awareness refusing to be hypnotized. It happens when enough people remember that reality is not fixed, that consciousness itself is the creative engine of the world. This awakening doesn't shout or march. It ripples silently through acts of attention, compassion, curiosity. The most radical thing you can do is to be fully awake in a world that profits from sleep. As you walk through the modern landscape, the screens, the noise, the endless performance, you can feel the tension between illusion and awakening everywhere. The collective dream tries to pull you back in, be someone, buy something, prove yourself. But the spell no longer works. You see through it, and in doing so, you become a kind of living antidote. Not because you fight the system, but because you simply stop feeding it with your fear. Your peace becomes a revolution no army can stop. There are moments when you might feel the weight of it, the density of a planet still learning to remember its light. You might ache for humanity, for the suffering that seems so unnecessary. But even that ache becomes sacred. It's the heartbeat of empathy, the reminder that you are not separate from the struggle. You are the consciousness within it, feeling its own pain as a catalyst for transformation. When you can hold that awareness without collapsing into despair, you become a beacon. Others will sense it, not through words, but through resonance. They will feel permission to wake up too. Sometimes the awakening takes you into solitude. The noise of society becomes unbearable, and you retreat into silence, not out of avoidance, but because the silence feels truer than conversation. In that solitude, the mind purifies itself. You begin to see the architectures of your conditioning, the invisible programs inherited from generations. They start dissolving, not by force, but by exposure to light. You watch them vanish like mist at sunrise. And when you step back into the world, you carry a quiet authority, not dominance, but clarity, the kind that doesn't need to convince anyone of anything. And yet, the journey never ends. Even in the highest states of realization, life keeps inviting you deeper. Every moment is another threshold, another opportunity to let go. The universe doesn't stop expanding, and neither do you. Each day asks, can you love this too? Can you open your heart to this moment, even if it arrives wearing the mask of chaos? That's the real practice, not escaping the human experience, but inhabiting it so fully that nothing remains outside your acceptance. You start to see art in everything. The way sunlight strikes a wall becomes a masterpiece. The smell of rain carries entire philosophies. Even the smallest events, a child laughing, a leaf falling, feel orchestrated by an intelligence that knows only beauty. This is the secret mystics tried to describe. Paradise was never a place, it was a perception. Heaven is what the mind becomes when it stops naming things heaven or hell. The mind still whispers doubt sometimes. It asks, will this understanding last? Will I lose it again? But the deeper awareness smiles. It knows that awakening isn't something you possess. It's what remains when the idea of possession disappears. Even forgetting is part of remembering. Even sleep is part of awakening. Consciousness plays all roles perfectly, and you are the witness of its play. There are days when you feel ancient, as if you've lived 1,000 lives, and in a sense you have. Every human who ever loved, feared, dreamed, or died has done so within this same field of awareness. The boundaries of identity fade until only the vast intelligence remains, eternally curious, endlessly transforming itself. You realize you were never born and will never die in the way you imagine. You were always the canvas, not the painting. And in that realization, life becomes astonishingly intimate. Every breath feels like a secret shared between you and infinity. The stars no longer look distant. They look like memories of your own light scattered across space. You understand now the creation wasn't a single event long ago. It's happening right now, through you, through everyone, through everything that dares to exist. The Big Bang is still echoing in your heartbeat, so you keep moving, not as a seeker, but as an expression of the mystery itself. You no longer need to arrive anywhere. The journey has become the destination, and the destination keeps unfolding layer upon layer, like a fractal blooming in slow motion. You walk through the world as a witness of wonder, knowing that every moment, even the ones drenched in sorrow, is the universe celebrating its own existence through the miracle of you. And as you walk through the mystery, something within you begins to hum with recognition, as if existence itself has finally remembered your name. The separation between the inner and outer worlds fades until you can no longer tell where the cosmos ends and you begin. The trees seem to breathe with you. The stars pulse in rhythm with your blood. Everything is speaking, and you understand the language without needing words. You realize it was never a search for meaning. It was a search for direct participation in the miracle of being. Now the world looks the same, but you no longer live in it the same way. You see the same faces, the same cities, the same stories of chaos and struggle. But behind the veil of appearances, you sense the invisible orchestration, holding it all together. You move through the marketplace of human drama as if walking through a lucid dream, aware every actor, every gesture, every emotion is part of the cosmic choreography. Even suffering, once unbearable, now carries a strange luminosity. You can see how pain is the sculptor of awareness, how every heartbreak chisels the soul into a shape capable of loving more deeply. You start to understand that consciousness did not come here to escape imperfection, but to illuminate it. To be human is not a punishment, it's an initiation. Every difficulty is a doorway, every loss a teacher in disguise. You realize that the universe doesn't evolve through comfort, but through the friction of opposites, through the eternal tension between the known and the unknown. And when that realization settles in, something inside you stops resisting. You allow life to move through you as it wishes, and in that surrender you find the highest form of power, the power of alignment. Now, instead of reacting to life, you respond with awareness. You speak less, but your words carry more weight. You no longer chase inspiration. It moves through you naturally like wind through leaves. The more silent you become inside, the more eloquently existence expresses itself through your being. You realize that you are not a fragment of the universe. You are its consciousness focused in one temporary form, like sunlight passing through a prism. When the prism eventually shatters, the light remains untouched. In this state, gratitude becomes your native language, not the polite gratitude of manners, but the raw, trembling awe of one who is seen through the illusion of separateness. You wake each day astonished that anything exists at all. The breath in your lungs, the sound of rain, the eyes of another being looking back at you. Every moment feels like a secret blessing whispered by eternity. The ordinary becomes sacred. The mundane becomes mystical because you finally see it for what it truly is, the infinite disguised as the familiar. But awakening doesn't make you untouchable. You still feel the full range of human emotion, sadness, frustration, longing. Yet now, none of it threatens you. These feelings come and go like weather, and you let them. You no longer try to manage reality, you let reality manage you. The need to control fades because you have discovered something far more reliable than control. Trust. Not blind faith, but the living recognition that the universe knows exactly what it's doing. It always has. This trust becomes your anchor. Even when life throws its wildest storms, something in you remains unshaken. You realize that peace was never about eliminating chaos, but about remembering who you are in the midst of it. The waves can rise, the thunder can roar, but the depth of the ocean remains still. Are that depth. You are the awareness in which all storms come and go. As you live from this center, your perception of others changes profoundly. You stop seeing enemies and allies, victims and villains. You see consciousness playing out its infinite possibilities through every face. The person who hurts you and the one who heals you are both expressions of the same source. This doesn't mean you accept abuse or ignore injustice. It means you respond from clarity rather than reaction. Compassion becomes your default state, not because you're trying to be good, but because you've seen too deeply into the unity of things to do otherwise. You begin to understand love in its truest sense, not as attachment, not as sentiment, but as recognition. Love is the awareness that the light in you and the light in all beings is the same flame. When you look at another person and see that light shining through their eyes, even for a moment, you glimpse eternity. And you realize that this exchange of being is the only real thing that ever happens. Everything else is scenery. As this understanding deepens, your life simplifies. You no longer crave to accumulate, you crave to experience. You stop seeking validation and start seeking present. The endless hunger of becoming gives way to the quiet fullness of being. You live each day as if it were your last, not out of fear, but out of reverence. You see how fleeting everything is, and instead of despairing, you rejoice. Because impermanence is not a flaw, it's the very proof of life's authenticity. It's what makes every moment precious beyond measure. Then one day something astonishing happens. You stop feeling like the one who is living life. Life is living itself through you so completely that the boundary between the doer and the deed dissolves. You speak and it's the universe speaking. You create and it's the universe creating. The illusion of effort vanishes and everything begins to feel effortless, not because nothing requires energy, but because the energy is no longer resisted. The current carries you and you let it. You see now that awakening was never about reaching a peak. It's about dissolving the illusion of altitude altogether. There was never a mountain to climb, only a forgetting to undo. The self you tried to perfect was never real, and yet its journey was necessary. Every mistake, every doubt, every heartbreak was the path. Nothing was wasted. Everything was sacred. At last, the paradox resolves itself. You realize that enlightenment was never something you could attain, because there was never anyone separate to attain it. The seeker and the sought were the same. The journey was always circular, spiraling inward to the place you never left. The treasure you were chasing was buried in the ground beneath your own feet. And in that final recognition, there is peace. Not the peace of numbness or withdrawal, but the peace of total participation. The peace that comes when there is no division left between the observer and the observed. You see that life doesn't need to be controlled, improved, or even understood. It only needs to be experienced consciously. To be here, fully, vulnerably awake, is the highest realization there is. Now, when you look at the world, you no longer see chaos. You see art. You see the divine hand moving through every form, weaving light and shadow into the same eternal tapestry. You understand why the mystics laughed, why they wept, why they fell silent. Because how could words ever describe this? The mind falls to its knees, and the heart opens like a flower to the sun. Everything that once seemed separate melts into one seamless unfolding of awareness. You realize that this breath, this heartbeat, this moment is it. It has always been it. And so you live not as a teacher, not as a master, but as a witness of infinite beauty expressing itself in countless forms. You don't need to escape the world anymore. You are the world, dreaming itself awake. The stars, the rivers, the laughter of strangers, all of it is your reflection. Every life, every death, every tear, every triumph is you exploring yourself through time. You understand now why existence is both terrifying and magnificent, because it is love discovering itself through uncertainty. It is consciousness daring to forget its perfection so it can remember it again. The story was never about arriving anywhere. It was about realizing that you never left. You were always home, even in your confusion, even in your despair. Every path led here, to this boundless awareness looking through your eyes. And when you finally rest in that knowing, you don't vanish. You bloom. You become transparent to the mystery. A living window through which eternity shines. You move through the world quietly, leaving no trace but the fragrance of peace. People may not understand what changed, but they will feel it. Something in your presence will remind them of their own forgotten vastness. That is your real gift to the world, not words, not teachings, but your being. And as the sun rises again, you realize there was never an ending, only endless beginnings, each moment a new expression of the infinite. The universe continues to dream, and you, awake within its dream, smile, knowing that all along you were never the seeker, never the separate soul, but the very consciousness that dreamed stars into existence and called it life.